The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Good morning to those in the West. Good afternoon to everybody in the East, and in the middle here, the Midwest. Hope you're having a good lunch. Welcome to 5 and 15, a webinar series from Charleston, Orwig, where we promise to give you 5 useful, interesting, actionable things, ideas you can use in your work in strategic marketing, communications, reputation management, crisis management, all within the constraints of a 15-minute webinar, because we know you are busy. My name is Mark Gale, CEO and partner here at CO. We're going to spend about 10 minutes on the content and another 5 minutes or so answering your questions. Let's jump right in. Crisis communications revamp. Now, for those of you who have a crisis plan, rules to use for you to update it. For those of you who don't have a crisis plan, and gee, you should if you work in food or agriculture related industries, these 5 rules can give you a foundation to get that started. And given how fast the industry changes, which leads us to our first question for you actually, or for us to think about, we need to be updated. When was the last time you updated your crisis plan? If you can't recall that instantly, it's probably been too long. Just this morning, for instance, I'm at Planet Fitness and saw a TV ad on NBC for A2 milk. Now that's a product that's going to affect dairies, and fluid milk producers and ice cream makers potentially, as well as suppliers to that industry. That's brand new and having an impact. How does it affect you if you're somewhere in that chain? The same goes through produce, food manufacturing, other industries in this space. Rule number 1, identify crisis team members and subject matter experts. Let's break that down a bit. Team members here at Charleston Orwig, and certainly among our clients, change over time and are ever changing. In addition to that, there are publications that I now subscribe to. New Food Economy is one. Didn't exist a couple of years ago. Even a year ago wasn't where it is now. Kate Cox, do you know her from that publication? She might be a good person to know going forward. Along with that, identify potential industry advocates, new technical experts at an association, researchers publishing information, someone at a startup that's complementary to what you're doing to your brand. Perhaps you want to know them, perhaps they would support your position, perhaps they have information that you want to quote. Need to be up to speed with that. Media training. This is where you have a reporter walk your team through how to respond to a reporter. When do you have to answer? When do you not have to answer? How not to be put into a place where you don't want to be. Remaining truthful and honest and transparent, but not getting into a position you don't want to be in. And within your organization, who should speak and who should not. The first 2 items I would say, update quarterly or an ongoing basis. Media training, probably a little refresher for a couple hours once a year, or when somebody new comes on. A lot of times we see that a new person comes on and media training is 3, 4, 5 years old. Don't let that happen to you. Rule number 2, think social. Really, really important. Mentioned the dairy industry earlier. Really vibrant communities on Facebook. We're doing some work in soil health. The oldest of all social platforms, listservs. Some of you probably don't know what that is or what those are because it dates back to AOL. Vibrant discussions right now, today, I can guarantee you online. If you want to reach dietitians, Pinterest, Instagram, good places to go. You need to know that. Be aware of closed interest groups. So you can know on Facebook, for instance, some of those groups where you need to have a moderator let you into it, be aware of those groups, get into them in times of calm, if you will, so you can see some of the chatter that might be happening about your brand, about you, about your industry, and some of the gossip that's going to impact messaging. In a technical field, Reddit might be a place where you want to know about subreddits where discussions are happening. You might bump into Bill Gates there, for example. Follow feeds, all of them. This can drive you crazy. It drives me a little bit crazy sometimes, but subscribe to lots of newsletters, lots of feeds, lots of publication feeds. I would do that via a separate email, maybe even a shared email, so people can go through there and sort of scan, then delete. Don't worry if you can't get to it, delete it. There will be more tomorrow. But by looking at those in the preview pane, you can see what's happening in the industry. And then make sure that you learn to talk Twitter, Pinterest, Reddit. What do we mean by that? All of those platforms, especially as they get more and more segmented, have sort of an aesthetic of how you talk, infographics that you might use to get your message across. Make sure that you have those prepared and you're ready. Rule number 3, updating action plans. As a former reporter, I love scenario planning where we get in and really put on our nasty hat and try to come up with ways that we could derail your company, derail your brand, derail your industry by just thinking of little leverage points, vulnerabilities that you might not be thinking about. And yeah, there's sort of a bit of fun in that, but it also surfaces your Achilles heel, if you will. What you can do with that then is apply media training internally to role play potential issues, so you know how you would talk about those and that you've surfaced and tried to come up with things that maybe on the surface you weren't anticipating. You can then look globally to see if those are being talked about elsewhere, because some of that might be reflected onto you locally. What's happening, well, with the A2 milk in New Zealand, for instance, with Frontera and their brands. Then you should, of course, have position papers, talking points, guidelines on the big issues with your industry, but take these contentious ones as well and make sure you write out, with an eye on truncated feeds, digital feeds, how you would handle those. Because it's one thing to talk about it, and it's one thing to have that in a document that can be shared around with other people to make sure you're prepared. Rule number 4, monitoring discussions. This is something that, kind of referred to it earlier, you can't wait for crisis. You sort of want to be doing this all the time. The way to do that is to assign a person, so you know what's happening in the industry with other companies related to your brand, with consumers, or up and down the value chain with distribution channels. So a person has to do that so you're not surprised, because you can combine that person with some monitoring tools, digital monitoring tools, to track chatter. And this works in B2B as well as B2C. It might be benign. There's a new executive director at an association, some new research published, a funny video, or it could be something that you want to be concerned about. The chatter, little bar charts that looking at chatter for specific topics, and we do this, can tell you a warning here. Artificial intelligence does not yet have a handle on sentiment. You need that person. No matter what the salespeople are going to tell you, you need a person to help figure that out. And because of that, and because technology is moving so fast, the analytics tools we use, Nuvi, for instance, Mention, Brandwatch, they're all kind of always leapfrogging one another for which one is best. So you need to do that as well and refresh those and change those out. Rule number 5, it's not over yet. We have this kind of sad, sick joke that if it's Friday at 3 o'clock, oh, there's probably going to be a crisis. Well, especially if it's a holiday weekend. Well, after that crisis and the churn and the 9 p.m. and Sunday morning 9 a.m. conference calls die down, everybody wants to take a deep breath and get away. Take that deep breath, but then begin to engage in proactive efforts to populate your story over time. We're working with a client right now where they're suffering from negative posts that are 2 and 3 years old. Well, you have to drive those down with things that are more current, optimized for search with the correct phrases and words, as well as make sure your story is getting out there just by volume. And so when there is a search or when there is a negative, the positive comes up, or maybe the positive has already displaced the negative, and you can build reputational capital. That reputational capital is your armor moving forward. It's what protects you. It's what gives you the benefit of the doubt. It's what you need to have, and it takes time to build with a content strategy. So don't wait for crisis to enact that. Well, that's a quick view of our rules. You can see them here. We can send them to you if you would like. And now we have time for just a few questions. First one, how in-depth should a crisis plan be for small groups, let's say representing 5,000? Well, I would say the answer to that is look at your group, look at what they touch, look at what issues might come up and questions they might be asked related to what they do, to what their industry is, and be prepared with some scenario planning to be able to ask those. You don't have to speak for the entire industry, but you need to be able to speak for yourselves. And so the size of that plan will kind of dictate itself how big it needs to be. I realize things can change quickly, but quarterly updates, really? Well, yeah, for the basic stuff, quarterly updates. Some of these things you don't need to, but legislation changes, consumer sentiment changes, controlled environment agriculture for produce is a huge thing, and it's becoming a huge consumer product or an emerging consumer product. So that needs, for instance, if you're in the produce industry or retailing, grocery industry, for that to be refreshed. And so you need to do it. And if you update the basics, even contact information, you won't be burdened with having to do that when crisis starts because you're already going to be under enough stress. You don't need more stress. What's the best way to figure out which social platforms our customers use? Go online and search. Go on the largest platforms and search. Hear from your industry advocates and those involved and from customers which closed groups are out there and search them out within the platforms to make sure you get admitted early. And then a lot of these are on the websites, and some of the smaller associations establish these closed groups, and you can get on those right away. One final one here. How do we make sure our messaging is on target and compassionate while still maintaining within legal requirements? Well, the way to do that is first commit to transparency, honesty, stepping up to the crisis as you should. Make sure, yes, to talk to the lawyers so you're legally being accurate and not getting yourself in trouble. But if you've made a mistake, you must own it. If you have to fix something, fix it and take ownership of that. Be compassionate with it. Sometimes crisis is a matter of unfortunate incident, like with Southwest Airlines a week or so ago. A good backgrounder on that is search that online. New York Times did a pretty good analysis of their crisis preparedness, and they did a great job. We're out of time right now. With that, thank you for joining us here for 5 and 15. I'm Mark Gale, CEO and partner at Charleston Orwig. Before we leave you, mark June 5th on your calendar, June 5th at this same time, 12:10 Central. We're going to talk about consumers and food labels. Not what government thinks should be on food labels, not what groups think should be on food labels. What do consumers think should be on food labels? We'll share some research that we just did here at CO. So that's it today for 5 and 15. Thank you so much for joining us.